So great to see so many people of you here after the party yesterday. So one thing I would like to start with is how many of you have lived for a significant amount of time abroad in some country? Yeah. So the motivation behind my speak here is that when you know that you're in a foreign country and you will be there for some time, one of the things that you might want to do is to open up a bank account, because that will make things a lot more simpler. But the thing is, maybe you don't know the local language and there's not so much information. So wouldn't it be good if you could have a chatbot that could give you the information that you need? So that's the topic of this talk. So what we will do today is we will see how can we make a multilingual chatbot, and so that we can communicate with it in our language, and we will get back the response in our language too. So in order to do that, we will use an SDK from Microsoft called the Microsoft Bot Builder. I will just start from scratch. We will do it from 5 new projects. And then we will increase this chatbot with more and more functionality. So the first thing that we will actually get out of the box is we will get an echo service. So if we type something into our chatbot, we will get that back. And maybe that's not so interesting, but at least that's a start, so we can start to reason how would we make this chatbot that can understand the language and can understand what are we asking about and can return the result in our language. So one of the things that we need to be able to do is we need to be able to translate text. So in the second step of this talk, we will enhance this echo service with a text translation service. And that's also a good start, but how can we make this chatbot more intelligent? So then there's a language understanding service, which belongs to the cognitive services offering from Microsoft. So we'll add that to our chatbot. So we'll talk a little bit about how this service is structured and about intents. So we need to be able to communicate our intents. What are we asking about? And our chatbot needs to be able to understand that also. And then for us to use it, we deploy it into the cloud, to Azure. And then we have two use cases, how we can use this bot in a web page, and also how we can use this bot in a Xamarin Forms application. Because if we can do that, then we can use it almost everywhere. We can use it on the web, or we can use it in our mobile. So also another question, how many of you are familiar with Microsoft and Azure and these kind of things? Okay, yeah, good. So the first thing that we do is we need to have some prerequisites. So we need to have Visual Studio, and we need to have this bot builder template for C#. And then we need to download an emulator so that we can test out our bot locally. And we also need to have some basic knowledge about how an ASP.NET Core application is working. And I should also say that already here from the start, everything that I have used is freely available. So there are different price tiers, but in order to do some prototyping and testing out things, you don't have to spend any money. These things are for free, so it's just to go ahead if you want to try it out. But now with the initial solution, we will see what will we get just out of the box when we do a 5-new project with this new template. So we will get a regular ASP.NET Core application with just we building up our web host just as we usually do, and we have a startup class. And in this startup class, we can configure our services, our middlewares. So one thing to notice here is that we have something called an echo bot. So we'll see what that is in a short while. And we also configure our middleware so that we can handle exceptions in the communication between the client and the bot. We configure a data store, and also we configure a middleware to handle this conversation. So I will describe this here. So when a chatbot talks to a client, they're sort of taking turns sending over a context object. So from this context object, we can decide what type of activity is it. So now in our scenario, we are only using messages, but there are also other types of activities that could be used. So we can get, from the context object, we can also get the state. And on this state, we can have custom objects, like for example, here we have something called turn count. So the turn count is just a counter that counts how many times this conversation has been back and forth between the chatbot and the client. And then what we do then is that we echo back both what the user typed and also the turn count of the state. This is just the echo state with this turn count parameter. But if we run this is just like a regular ASP.NET project, so this is basically what we will get. Maybe not so exciting, but luckily for us there is a bot emulator that we can use. So this is the bot emulator, so here we can enter an endpoint URL for our bot. Then it looks something like this. So you can write some text. And then we can see this was turn 1, and then you sent, and then hello, and then we can write some more, and then you can see that this counter will increase. So at least now we, without doing anything, any programming at all, we got a really simple echo bot. And that's also a thing that I would like to show you, that when we're done with this, I think that you will agree that we don't need to be a data scientist or machine learning expert in order to get the chatbot up and running. And it's actually quite a small amount of code that needs to be written. So the second thing that we would like to do is we would like to be able to translate text. So how can we do that? It turns out that Microsoft has a text translator service as part of this cognitive services offering. So one of the things that this text translator service can do is that it can automatically detect the language so that we can translate from one language to another. So that seems to be a good candidate for us. So let's go over to the Azure portal. So in the Azure portal we can search for translator, and then we will get the translator text component that we can start. So we start up this translator text. We get the text translator, and maybe the most important thing here is that it has some keys that we need to put into our application in order for us to be able to use this service. So if we move back to our chatbot, we need to enhance our chatbot so that we can use this text translator service. So now again we're here in this setup services section. So what we've added one more middleware. So we added a middleware called the translation middleware, and the translation middleware takes default language, which is English, and then a parameter which is blackened out, and that is this key that I was talking about. And then the last parameter is a boolean, and if it is false, then regardless of the input language, it will always fall back onto the default language, which is English. So now if we ask this chatbot anything in any language, it will return the reply in English. We can try that out to see. We write bonjour in French, and then we get again, you said hello, so we can see that the text translation service is working. We can ask in Norwegian, and it's response in English and in Spanish. That's a good thing, but the objective of this thing that we want to have a chatbot that actually can reply in our language. So we need to tweak this middleware a little bit. So as I said, this last boolean was booleans that sets if the chatbot is going to use the default language or if it will use the same language as the input language. So we just put this to true, and then we try this out again. So now we can see that this is going in the right direction. Now we can ask things in French and we get a reply in French. We can ask things in Norwegian and we get a reply in Norwegian. And we can ask things in Spanish and we get a reply in Spanish. So that's a good thing. But how can we make our chatbot intelligent? Well, we need to make our chatbot be able to understand the language. And then there is a service called Louise, which is the language understanding service. And here we're talking about intents. So for example, if a user is typing or saying, book me a flight to Cairo, then we need to be able to extract what is the intent of this sentence. So the intent is more or less what do we really want to do. So then there is some machine learning going on behind the curtain. So we can see here that the intent book flight has a really high probability, so we get a score of 0.98. Whereas, for example, the intent location finder gets a really low score, like 0.01. So that means that it's mostly probably this conversation deals with booking a flight. And then in addition to intents, we also have something called entities. So an entity is usually a noun. So here the entity is Cairo. So then we can figure out where does this person want to go. So here's another example. We can say that we want to order two pizza. So then we get the top scoring intent of food order, and then we also get two entities. So first entity is the number 2, and then the second entity is pizzas. So they have different types also. So the 2 has the type of number, and pizzas has the type of food type. And you can also say, remind me to call my dad tomorrow. So then we get the top score of reminder intent. And then here the entity is actually tomorrow. And that's a type of date time date. So it's quite flexible. So there are lots of things that you can use this Louise service for. You can also ask them about directions, like where is the nearest club. So that got an intent of location finder. But it doesn't have any entities. So now if I log into this Louise portal, then I've created a bot called the Grevis bot, and now I'm going to show you how that has been set up. Because the thing is that we need to train our bot so that it can understand the context and the topics and intents that we are dealing with. So here I've added the intent which are frequent in banking conversations. Like maybe you want to know about your PIN code, you want to know about your bank ID, maybe there are some error messages. You want to know how can I open an account, how do I do if I want to change my address. So once you have decided upon your intent, you need to train the Louise service with some sentences that represents these intents. So here this is the greeting intent. So basically you just type different types of greetings, so then the Louise service will learn what is the greeting intent. So whenever we type something which is similar to hello, hey and hi and so on, then the Louise service can determine that it's mostly probably a greeting intent. And you also see the score here on the right hand side that hello, for example, has a probability of 0.93. So the more examples that you give, the more accurate this Louise service will become. And the same thing here with address change. So here I've added some commonly sentences like, what do I need to do to change my address, or can you help me with address change, what is important when changing address, and so on. And then in the same manner as with the translation service, we also get a key and an endpoint so that we can call this key and we can be authorized to use this service. So if we go back to our chatbot, then we have added one more middleware. So this middleware is called the Louise Recognizer middleware. Inside that middleware we have a Louise model that needs to be configured. So we need to have the app ID that we can get from the Louise portal, and also the subscription key and a region based URL. And we also need to change a little bit inside the echo bot. So what we can do here is from the context object, we can extract the result that Louise gives back. So Louise is making a prediction of what is the intent and what is the probability of that intent. So we get that back in a Louise result, and then we can extract a key, which is the intent, and also the score, which is this probability. So we can get the top scoring intent. So what we do is we send back the top intent, and also which score with the score of the top intent. And also we also send back the text that we have written. So if we try this thing out, and we get back that hello, the top intent was greeting with a score of 0.93, and also that you sent hello. And how do I open an account? So then the top intent was open account with a score of 0.93. And here I'm asking about change address, and then we can see that the address change was the top intent, it's 0.93. So, but let's see, does the functionality with languages, that still work? So let us try that out. We write bonjour, then we get back that the top intent was greeting. So, and we can ask in the region. And then we get back the intent, and we can ask something in Spanish. But now we're back here to this situation that we ask something in one language, and then we get back things in another one. So we need to fix that. So we change this parameter to true for the translation middleware, and then we try this thing again. So now it looks better. Now we ask something and we get back the intent and the scoring, and we get it back in the same language as the language that we are asking things. So the next thing we need to figure out, how can we, so now we can figure out what intent is it that we're talking about, but how can we handle this intents? What should we do when we know that this is an intent about opening an account, for example? So we need to add some functionality here to handle our banking intents. We go back to our EchoBot, and then we can just have a look at the top intent, and we can see, we can just make a case on the top intent. And so I made a class called chat response. So based on the intent, it will make it will retrieve a response based on the intent. And the chat response is very simple, as it looks like this. So based on the intent, it will return some helpful information in English. So let's try this out and see how that works. Now we just do a test here to see if the intent is actually working, and it looks like they're working. So we get back we can retrieve the right intent, and then it will return the right information for our questions. And then we change this translation middleware, so now it should actually be working the way that we would like it to. We make a greeting in French, and we get back the French response. And we ask how can we open a bank account in Spanish. And we get back the information in Spanish too. And we ask something in Norwegian. And we get back with some information in Norwegian. So that's great, but so far we have only run this locally. So how can we do if we want to use this? Maybe we want other people to use it too. So then we can publish this thing to Azure, because after all it's just a regular ASP.NET Core component, so we can publish it just like any other component that we have been working with. So we publish this thing, then we get an app service. And but in order for us to be able to use it as a chatbot, we also need to register this thing as a bot channel registration. So the bot channel registration is both a pointer to our app service, but it also handles something which is called channels. So we'll have a look at these channels now in a short bit. So out of the box we have a web chat channel. So the web chat channel means that you can communicate with your bot through the web. So you will get some template code that you can use on your web page, and we will look at how that looks like in a short while. But then there are also many other channels. Like for example, you can connect your bot to Cortana or to Microsoft Teams or to Skype or Facebook Messenger and so on. And there's a special channel called the direct line channel, which we will use in a short while. So what is special with the direct line channel is that then you're using our bot more or less like a REST API. So you can make questions to the API, and then you will get back the information, but it's up to you how you want to parse it and how you want to present that information. And And also in addition to this, we also get in a portal a test application. So we can test it that this is actually working not only on my machine. So and also this test client is using the same security mechanism as any other external client would use. So then we know that this is safe to send out to someone else to try it out. That should be working. So now let's have a look at this web chat channel. So as I said, you will get some template code that you can use. So basically it's just an iframe that you can put anywhere on your web page with a link to this bot. And then you also have a key which is outside of the print screen on this slide. But what it looks like looks something like this. And you could also style things with some CSS or some other things there. But it's a really fast way to get something up and running and to prototype and try things out. But we also have this other thing called the direct line channel. So the direct line channel is, as I said, then we're using a chatbot more or less as a REST API, and we need to make a call to it, and then we need to handle whatever we get back. So then I've just made a console program here where we're using this direct line channel. So the direct line channel has a secret that we need to provide, and we have something called start the bot conversation. So we are just setting up the bot, and then we do a while loop where we listen to input from the user, and then we make an activity that we send over to the chatbot. So it looks something like this now. Now we can see without too much work we got both chatbot that we can use on our web page, but we can also make, so like for example this example also shows that the chatbot can be part of a much larger operation, because now we can call it from anywhere inside any type of program. So it's quite flexible. But let's see, how could we use this in a Xamarin Forms application? So I've made a Xamarin Form application with a model and model view, and this is the main page UML. And here we set up some URLs for the chatbot, and we are using this direct line communication. And we create some HTTP clients. So one will start the conversation, and then the other will continue the chat. And we just need to add some request headers. So we add this bot secret as a bearer token to the chat HTTP clients. So here we can start a conversation. So we basically post to the bot, and then we get some results back, and then we know that now the bot is ready, up and ready. And then we can post. So we use this start conversation client and we post to the bot, and we get the stream back, and we read the results out of the stream. And this is sort of what happens in the mobile app that we will see. We just have a button which is send message. So we have an observable collection, my chat, where we add everything that relates to this chat, and then we do post to a bot, and then we just extract things. So as I said before, we could have other things also. So we could have attachment, for example, but now in this case we're only sending pure text. So it will look something like this. and that's Outlook, right? So I think we can see here as a conclusion that we don't really need to be a data scientist or machine learning engineer in order to make a chatbot. So now in quite a short amount of time we've developed a chatbot that is quite flexible. We can use it on the web, so we can use it in a mobile application, or we can also use it anywhere in our code using this direct line channel. I hope this has been an inspiring session for you, so that you can go out and make your own chatbots. If you have any question or want more information, you can always reach me on my email or on my Twitter handle.
Yep. Thank you for your talk, Håkan. Any questions?